pleasure to be able to speak with you today and have this chance to discuss the increasingly important topics of both sanctions and counter-proliferation finance. As my colleagues mentioned, I am a research analyst for the Center for Financial Crime and Security Studies here at RUSI, where my research primarily focuses on the design and implementation of financial and economic sanctions, as well as assessing the multitude of ways in which sanctions can be evaded. It is with the deepest gratitude that I'm very much looking forward to speaking with you today. So to begin with, I am going to discuss the multiple ways in which sanctioned actors can engage in sanctions evasion through the financial and corporate infrastructure. And to do this, I am primarily going to draw on the Glocom network case. An important starting point is to recognize that to effectively restrict the funds of designated persons, you will require full cooperation between the different sectors of financial and corporate industries. This is especially relevant since the counter-proliferation finance definition provided by the Financial Action Task Force is particularly expansive and encompasses all financial activities which may facilitate sanctioned actions. This ranges from banks, companies, and other financial institutions within the corporate infrastructure to specific activities such as shipping or insurance. Leading into this, the Glocom case study, which has been provided as a case study in a United Nations Security Council report, demonstrates how critical effective implementation of targeted financial sanctions is. In addition to this, this case study demonstrates how widespread sanctions evasion can be when measures are not put in place adequately by the various industries to restrict the access of these entities to the designated funds. In the next slide, I'm going to discuss this trend further. So moving on to the case study, Glocom's payments to suppliers and transfers often made use of a particular pattern, combining a variety of tactics commonly used by designated entities to evade financial sanctions. First, a national of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or the DPRK, would make a bulk cash deposit into one of Glocom's accounts in Pyongyang. This deposit would be reconciled by ledger with accounts controlled by an individual, Kim Chol-sam, the then representative of the Daedong Credit Bank in China. On the same or the next day, Kim Chol-sam would initiate a transfer to the intended recipient in Malaysia or Singapore for the same amount. To do so, actual funds would flow from the account where the deposit had been recorded to an entity acting on behalf of the sanctioned part-controlled front company in Hong Kong, less transfer fees and a commission for middlemen. The front company would then, in turn, remit funds to the intended recipient. As a result of this, the receiving financial institution in Malaysia or Singapore would see only an incoming payment from the Hong Kong front company, rather than one from International Global System or PAN Systems, who were the actual holders of the accounts with the Daedong Credit Bank. The same, of course, is true of correspondent banks processing the transactions, including those in New York, which would have had little insight into the origin or beneficiaries of the transaction. As we can see, the Glocom network case study made use of multiple financial and corporate industries, as well as using extensive evasive tactics. These have included using front companies in Hong Kong and elsewhere, the use of offshore bank accounts throughout Asia and the Middle East. The company also had direct control of overseas accounts, which allowed them to continuously move funds between these accounts. And finally, we can see that the use of both third country intermediaries and sanctioned entity country individuals meant that the funds continued to flow to the designated entity despite the extensive international measures in place. This United Nations case study tells us that despite understanding how and when sanctioned actors can abuse the financial and corporate infrastructure, the implementation of targeted financial sanctions and recognizing evasive opportunities remains of critical importance. So moving on to the next slide now, I'm going to discuss the many ways in which sanctions evasion can affect the private sector. So as we can see, sanctions evasion is a widespread measure which prevents effective implementation of the sanctions themselves, as well as enabling designated actors to continue their activities. Sanctions evasion can occur when designated persons and entities indirectly access funds or financial services through the use of numerous techniques, which I'm going to discuss shortly. In a similar vein, the Glocom network case study tells us that sanctions evasion is not only a frequent and a common threat, but it is also an activity